Koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere aki nei, it's a budget bonanza, the dollars and whether they make sense. The big ticket item, a $3 billion plus bump for benefits and extra coin for students too. Pharmac's funding is a bitter pill for some, half of what they were hoping for. And Maori initiatives, housing and health, get $1.1 billion. It's calculators at dusk. The Finance Minister joins us, so does Judith Collins. Is there anything in it that she likes? And during all the budget brouhaha, the embattled Ports of Auckland boss quietly announces he's quitting. We're also in the Cook Islands with tour operators.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata tēnei. The government has unapologetically focused its financial firepower at beneficiaries, delivering increases to base rates this year and next. Finance Minister Grant Robertson has delivered his recovery budget, saying it returns benefit levels to where they were before being slashed in the mother of all budgets 30 years ago. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
Beneficiaries reap the rewards with the welfare boost billed as the biggest in a generation. The Labour majority government will lift all benefit rates by between $32 and $55 a week, in line with recommendations by the Welfare Expert Advisory Group. The increases will be introduced this year and next. Along with a boost to student support, they'll cost about $3.3 billion over 4 years. The budget came under immediate opposition attack, spending to the detriment of future generations, nothing to support business and nothing to put a rocket under the economy. From Parliament, Jane Patterson.
The Leader of the Opposition, Judith Collins, told the House that Budget 2021 is full of empty promises and zero plans for growth.
So today's budget, let's have a look at it. They said it's the securing our recovery budget. I actually thought it was more like a cement New Zealand stagnation budget, but it's definitely a broken compass budget with nothing to take New Zealand forward.
Judith Collins says the government should have reined in spending and left future generations with less debt. But the Prime Minister says taking on more debt is an investment in the future generations. Jacinda Ardern says she doesn't want the next generation to carry a social debt like it has had to under previous national budgets, including the so-called mother of all budgets.
The budget in 1991 chose cuts. They chose user pays, and they left a burden of debt that generations have carried for decades. And Mr. Speaker, we are still paying for that decision.
The debt level in the budget is forecast to peak at 48% of the value of the economy. Finance Minister Grant Robertson had earlier told the House that the government faced pressure to spend up while money is cheap and fix entrenched problems. But others wanted the government to rein in spending to bring debt down.
I believe Budget 2021 gets the balance right. It protects New Zealand's strong position by keeping a lid on debt and tracking a responsible return towards surplus, while also giving us the ability to make targeted investments where they are needed most to secure our recovery.
The budget shows a stronger economic rebound from the COVID-19 pandemic is allowing the government to spend more and borrow less. Treasury forecast average growth of 3.5% a year over the next 4 years and unemployment falling to 4.2%. In other announcements, $500 million has been set aside to begin the government's massive overhaul of the health system, including scrapping the 20 district health boards. In education, spending will rise by more than $2 billion over 4 years, with new schools and classrooms planned. And in climate change measures, Kiwi Rail is getting $1.3 billion and $300 million is going into green investments in low-carbon technology, electric vehicles and public transport. In other news, the embattled chief executive of the Ports of Auckland has resigned after weeks of mounting criticism. There have been 3 port fatalities in recent years. An independent report into those deaths found systemic failings. In a video message, Tony Gibson said it was a hard decision.
But the reason for that is that the last months there's been a real public challenge with the spotlight on me, and it has been damaging the reputation of the port and our people. And I love our people, and it's not great for me and my family either.
Tony Gibson will finish up at the end of June. It's 4 minutes past 5. The All Black hooker Dane Coles remains confident the standoff between New Zealand Rugby and the Players Association will be resolved, despite the two sides being further apart than ever. The parties are at loggerheads over the planned $390 million investment by US private equity firm Silver Lake. That deal into the game here. Earlier this week, former All Blacks coach Steve Hansen called on the two parties to quit their public spat and sort out their differences behind closed doors. The Silver Lake deal is at the centre of player contract negotiations breaking down, but Coles remains upbeat.
It's a big deal, and you can see there's a bit of tension and stuff like that, but it's just part of it, and I'm sure they'll get on the same page and be grown-ups about it and have a yarn. I think Shag put it probably the best. Earlier did laundry in a meeting room and just make the relationship a bit better because it's going down the wrong path.
The Breakers American basketball import Levi Randolph will return from injury against the Sydney Kings in Waitakere tonight and has hinted he could be back next season. Randolph has been sidelined for nearly 3 weeks because of a hamstring injury, and the Breakers have lost every game he's missed. With captain Tom Abercrombie out from the side's first game back in the country, Randolph is aware of the impact he needs to have.
There's no pressure. Been playing basketball for a long time, so really just have to block everything else out and go out there and give it your all.
The game tips off at 7:30. And New Zealand driver Scott Dixon was the fastest on the second day of practice in the Indianapolis 500. That's the news.
Bombardment continues in Gaza.
We're being trapped in our houses. We cannot go out. We're under attack. We're being bombed.
Division in the classrooms.
On some topics in some communities, there will need to be some care about the consequences of those histories.
And Trump is under fire again.
The former president's legal jeopardy and the legal jeopardy of those associated with him in his business empire is deepening.
Big issues examined. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Now the short forecast from meat service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Waitomo, including Coromandel Peninsula and Central High Country. Cloudy periods, isolated showers. Bay of Plenty fine tonight, becoming cloudy tomorrow with evening drizzle. Taranaki to Kapiti Coast, cloudy periods, chance of a shower tomorrow. Gisborne to Wairarapa, including Wellington, Nelson and Marlborough. Fine apart from cloudy periods in Wellington and Wairarapa tonight. Bulla to Fiordland, mostly cloudy. Isolated showers turning to rain in Fiordland tonight, then spreading elsewhere tomorrow, clearing to fine weather south of Bulla tomorrow night. For Canterbury, mainly fine, cloud and a few showers developing tomorrow afternoon. Otago and Southland, fine weather, rain developing tomorrow morning with snow lowering to 900 metres for a time, then clearing to fine in the afternoon, apart from coastal Southland. And Chatham Islands, cloudy periods with a few showers. RNZ National at 7 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susana. Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki checkpoint I tēnei rā. Ko Lisa Owen tēnei. The biggest benefit rise in a generation. That's the budget headline. The Finance Minister, Grant Robertson, has delivered a boost for beneficiaries in his first budget of the Labour majority government. That's the big ticket item at more than $3 billion over 4 years. But there was also more money for Pharmac, district health boards, and to fund health and education reforms. There's a $1 billion package for Maori, including money to set up the promised Maori Health Authority to provide 1,000 houses. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
Remove the shackles. This is a budget unconstrained, a deep red budget, the first in decades.
Budget 2021 is a recovery budget.
Grant Robertson has been calling it a recovery budget, and yes, it is in the context of COVID-19. But it turns out the Finance Minister is casting back even further. He sees this as a recovery from another time and another budget.
This is going to be the mother of all budgets, yes, as they say.
It was in 1991 that Ruth Richardson oversaw the so-called mother of all budgets, still reviled by the left for its spending and welfare cuts.
On the 30th anniversary of that budget, our government is undoing some of the damage done all those decades ago.
And so at the budget's centre is a big benefit boost, $3.3 billion over 4 years. Beneficiaries will get an extra $32 to $55 a week. It'll come in 2 tranches, $20 a week from July the 1st and the remainder in April next year. The boost brings benefits in line with that recommended by the government's welfare experts in 2019. indeed exceeds them for those with children.
I am proud of this budget. It will leave a legacy for the next generation and start to undo the harm of the last.
That was a budget for benefits, not for jobs.
National leader Judith Collins says it's a broken compass budget, no direction and nothing in it for middle New Zealand.
This government doesn't really care actually about our children, do they? Or grandchildren. Because what they're doing is that they're actually investing and hoping for the number of people who are going to become dependent on the state.
Treasury is forecasting unemployment to peak at 5.2% this quarter, before dropping back to 4.2% in 3 years. It's a different tale from its predictions this time last year. Then it was tipping unemployment to touch 10%. The books are in better shape too. Debt is now forecast to peak at 48% of GDP in 2023.
A year on from the 2020 COVID-19 budget, we are well positioned and ready to tackle those long-standing challenges and take new opportunities.
New opportunities in the wake of COVID and without the shackles of last term. Labour promised and failed to be transformational then. There are no excuses now.
He waka eka noa, we are all in this together.
From Parliament for Checkpoint, Craig McCulloch.
It's Finance Minister Grant Robertson's first budget without a coalition or support party in tow. The first Labour budget in decades. So does it show?
Focuses on making sure we lift the incomes of the lowest income New Zealanders, making sure we restore some dignity for those people and their families. It's got a big focus on doing the things that will create jobs, higher paying jobs, things like the investment in infrastructure and in skills, and a major boost in funding for things in health and education. I think they're pretty core issues for the Labour Party. They're the things we campaigned on as well. So it's a budget I am proud of.
So benefits, let's look at them. $32 to $55 a week increase over 2 years. Why make them wait? Why not give it to them all up front?
Well, actually, we are bringing some of it forward. So normally when we do benefit increases, it's from the 1st of April in each year. We've brought $20 a week of that forward to July, and then we fulfil the commitment on the 1st of April, as is normally done. There are flat rate increases are easier to bring in. Then in the second round in April, they increase by various amounts to meet those welfare expert advisory group recommendations. We go further than that for families, for those with children, and obviously we bring the student support increase in there as well. So actually we're bringing it forward.
It's at the lower end of the Welfare Advisory Group recommendations though, isn't it? Because one of their suggestions was $100 a week.
Well, it is in terms of the specific rates that they recommended for main benefits. We either meet them or exceed them. They do have other recommendations, including in areas like the family tax credit, youth rates and so on. And we'll continue to look at those. We're doing a review of working for families, and that's why we haven't moved on that issue yet, but we will be continuing to look into that. But in terms of the actual rates, we've either met them or exceeded them.
So job seekers, what does that give you then with the increase?
I'm sorry, I don't have all those numbers right in front of me, Lisa. We've got $315, I know, for the job seeker over 25,
okay.
But I don't have all the specific numbers in front of me.
Right, so let's just use that number for the moment. You said it's about living with dignity. Does $315 a week give you dignity?
It certainly makes a huge step forward in that, and given where we were, this is the biggest benefit increase in a generation, and it is where the Welfare Expert Advisory Group landed. Bear in mind, we have increased other supports, and this will now is now indexed to the rise in average wages, so it will keep going up as wages rise as well. But again, I've heard some people today saying that this shouldn't have been our priority. Well, I think given where we've got to, we're restoring some dignity. We know there's more work to do when it comes to the issues around welfare.
Could you not do more now, though? Because if you look at your forecasts, right, you're looking pretty good. Unemployment's looking good, growth is looking good, your debt track is better than anticipated. So if not now, when?
Well, we did do it now. I mean, we're talking here about more than $3 billion.
It's about sort of size, isn't it? Proportion. You could have gone bigger. Yeah. Why didn't you?
Well, I mean, again, it remains a balance. It is important that we understand we've taken on very large levels of debt in order to be able to support New Zealanders through COVID. Yes, the economy is performing much better than expected. That's given us some more options. Net debt now stays under 50% throughout
the period, that is a really good outcome. But equally, it's significantly higher than New Zealanders have been used to in recent times. I think we got the balance about right here. This is the biggest boost to benefits in a generation.
OK, let's talk about Pharmac. 200 million over 4 years, right? Advocates were telling us Pharmac needed about twice that for life-saving drugs. What do you say to the people whose lives depended on Pharmac getting more than 200 million?
Look, all of us have people, friends, family who have been, affected by the fact that they've got issues that they need dealt with by new medicines that are just coming onto the market, and I feel deeply for those people. What I say to them is that this is a continuation of the increases we've been putting in. We've increased the Pharmac budget by 25% since we've been in office. We're over $1 billion per year. What we're doing at the same time as those funding increases is our review of the settings of Pharmac, and that's where we do get into the nitty-gritty of whether the model is the best model for dealing with rare diseases or new medicines that appear that people really want to get access to. So that's a priority piece of work for us. In the end, Pharmac makes the decisions on what medicines get funded, so we're not involved in those specific day-to-day issues, but this is another boost on top of other boosts, and it will mean more medicines for more people.
But when you compare it to some of the other things you spent money on, right, more than $300 million for Scott Base, how do you reconcile the value of those competing interests? One of them is a life and death issue.
Yeah, look, and these are the challenges we face in every single budget, putting them together. We need to do things that are, as you say, about the immediate, the here and now, but we also need to do things that are about the creation of jobs in the long term, the generation of wealth that we can then use to be able to fund other services. So there's always a mix of those things in a budget, and we have continually increased the funding for Pharmac, and we will keep doing that as we go forward from here.
$380 million investment in Maori housing solutions, which will get, 1,000 new houses and repairs to 700. I mean, how much is that going to help when you look at the social housing list and you've got more than, 22,000 people backed up on it, waiting for somewhere to live?
Well, of course, it's not the only thing we're doing in terms of reducing the social housing list, but it's a very important contribution. Māori home ownership rates are much lower than the general public, around 31% for Māori versus 52% for the general public. So we think that this is a really important start in making sure that we address that Māori housing need. Beyond that, we're building more public houses than any government for decades. We are working around reducing that housing register, but actually, had the previous government built houses at the rate that we are now, we would not have those people on that register.
On the subject of housing, interesting that Treasury forecasts a drop in the rate of growth from 17% this year to under 1% by June of next year. That could really hurt our growth. Are you ready for that and the risk around that?
Well, clearly when we put in place the policy that Treasury acknowledged will have an impact there, the interest deductibility being taken away, we were aware that we were tipping the balance away from investors and into first home buyers. From our perspective, I've been saying for years that the New Zealand economy cannot be based on population growth and selling houses to one another. It has to be based on productive and sustainable growth. We've got
has the pendulum swung back too far in the other direction now?
Look, in the end, Treasury have made this assumption based on their numbers. We'll see how it ends up. But, well, generally speaking, Treasury's projections and forecasts are pretty good. On this one, we'll see how it goes. What I do think is that a correction here was necessary. House price inflation at 17% is unsustainable. And, I'm pleased that we've taken initiatives. It's not just us either. This includes the impact of loan to value ratios that the Reserve Bank have brought in. The proof will be in the pudding, but I do believe that we needed to see a reduction in that house price inflation because it was simply unsustainable.
Hey, your tie there.
Yes.
Pretty predictable.
See, I didn't buy it, so we need to be a little bit careful here because the Prime Minister bought it from me as a gift, so I like it.
Good answer. And that was Finance Minister Grant Robertson. It is almost 19 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. And still to come on the program, National Leader Judith Collins. Does she like anything in the budget? Ports of Auckland boss Tony Gibson has announced he's resigning and will step down at the end of June. Mr Gibson has been at the port for a decade and in recent times has come under scrutiny for major health and safety failings. Our reporter Nita Blake-Person joins us live. Nita, what's led to this?
Well, it all kind of comes against the backdrop of some pretty loud calls for Mr Gibson to stand down, particularly in relation to some concerns around some major health and safety failings at the ports of Auckland. That's in addition to some delays in the rollout of an automation project down there, and of course delays in getting freight into New Zealand due to COVID and worldwide freight issues. But this has all kind of come to a head in the past few months after the release of an independent safety report, which pretty squarely laid the blame about some health and safety concerns at the feet of management and Tony Gibson. It basically said profit was being put ahead of people, and that has just meant growing concerns around his leadership there. There were calls from independent leaders, Tau Henare of the Independent Maori Statutory Board, as well as Maritime New Zealand, for Tony Gibson to stand down. He's been absolutely adamant throughout this entire time that he will not stand down, that he's the right person to lead the port throughout this tricky time. He said he had a moral obligation even and wasn't aware of a lot of those health and safety concerns. So that's also been the case with the port's chairman, Bill Osborne. He said he had his support, but obviously that's changed this week. Earlier today, he put out a video in which he said there had been a discussion between him and Mr Osborne, and he'd decided to resign. Here's what he had to say in that video a little earlier.
So I wanted to say this was a very difficult decision, but the reason for that is that the last months there's been a real public challenge with the spotlight on me, and it has been damaging the reputation of the port and our people. And I love our people, and it's not great for me and my family either. I really wanted to support the team through the chasm and culture change, and of course to the end with full terminal rolled out. But as long as I'm in office and we've got a shareholder and media attention on me, it doesn't help you and our good people of Ports of Auckland to do what you do best. And you do things very well. But our plan has not changed. We need to focus on our safety, clearing congestion, delivering automation, and getting really good consistency across the business. I will be finishing up at the end of June, and our Deputy CEO, Wayne, will be taking over as interim CEO while the board go through a process of appointing a new CEO. The time I've had here has been the most joyous 10 years of my life, and I've been surrounded by people who I've grown to respect and admire, and for their dedication, for their inspiration, for their innovation. And I would say that we are and have been for some time the most innovative port in New Zealand, and that says something about you. So I'll be around to say goodbye, but I want to wish you all the best, and very soon I hope that we'll be out of this media scrap with the focus not on me but on the good things that you are delivering for Auckland and New Zealand. Thank you.
So Nita, what's the reaction been to this?
Well, quite a few people have had things to say, starting with Phil Goff, who obviously did have some major concerns about the running of things down there. He's put out quite a to-the-point statement saying that the council will support the board, who will appoint the new chief executive in its recruitment process, and he looks forward to that person, being in place as quickly as possible and implementing the recommendations of that safety review, as well as getting cracking with the automation project. Maritime New Zealand, who had wanted Mr Gibson gone for some time, have said that this is the right outcome. They said his 10-year reign had actually been really negative at the ports of Auckland. He'd been anti-union agenda, failed to provide a safe workplace, and was responsible for the slowdown in that automation. All of issues they say aren't the case at any other ports around the country. Michael Barnett, the Chief Executive of the Auckland Chamber of Commerce, however, quite a different take. He's put out a statement saying the resignation is not about the supply chain, health and safety or modernisation. It's about political and union bullying. He says there's no winners on all of this, but he will be wearing a pink shirt for Tony Gibson tomorrow. I've also spoken to the families of some of those people, particularly Laboom Dyer's family, who was killed in the ports in recent years. His family's pleased to see Tony Gibson go. Other staff members I've spoken to have voiced concerns about any potential payoff that there may be for Mr Gibson in leaving his position. Now, there's been no mention that there would be any case of that. We don't know that, but that was concern from some of the staff there, given Mr Gibson has been on a salary of more than $800,000.
Thank you, Nita. That is Nita Blake-Person talking there on the resignation of Tony Gibson, the boss of Ports of Auckland. Cook Islands tourism operators are conceding life may never be the same for the island nation as it tries to bounce back from a global pandemic. Wage subsidies and free accommodation have been offered to try and stop workers fleeing to New Zealand, but many have still packed their bags. And the situation in the Cooks has some wondering, is there too much emphasis on tourism? Our reporter Nick Trubridge and cameraman Nate McKinnon have the story.
Kia ora, Captain Thomas. Good morning.
Antonia Poa has been waiting a long time for calls like this.
Lovely, me toki mata. Thank you, babe. Bye. Yes.
The New Zealand Cook Islands bubble has been open for 3 days now, but this morning marked Captain Tama's Lagoon Cruise's first new booking. It's one down and hopefully many more to come, but manager Antonia is pumped nonetheless.
Getting into my computer again, I was like, what is my username? What is my passwords? So that took a little while. And then when the phone rang and took the booking, it was like, okay, where does it go again? Okay, yeah, for how many? But it just, like riding a horse again, it's all good. I'm onto it. We're running a cruise on Friday.
Before COVID-19 cut the Cook Islands off from the rest of the world, 14 people worked at Tama's Lagoon Cruises, which offers, you guessed it, a Muri Lagoon cruise complete with a fish barbecue and snorkelling.
There's 5 of us left. Jobs. Yeah. And then the 7 that went to New Zealand. 14 we did have. Yeah, so we've got 2 around the island that went to building jobs, and then the 7 that went to New Zealand.
Antonia says she encouraged those 9 ex-colleagues who she hopes will return someday to find work elsewhere if it meant putting food on the table. Staff left behind were supported by the government wage subsidy. They became builders, upgrading the company's boats and buildings. Captain Tama's can take 120 people out on the water across its 4 boats. That business evaporated completely, apart from locals, some of who never really have a chance to access things like this.
And we ran some schools too, because kids were still at school. So it was a good time to take all our kids out into the lagoon, because some of them have never been.
Business owners in Rarotonga are quietly optimistic their fortunes are about to change. But at the same time, they are realists. Take Steve Lyon, who took a big risk by buying beachfront bar and brasserie at the Rarotonga Sailing Club, bang smack in the middle of the pandemic.
It's never going to be back to normal. It's going to be what is the new normal in the sense of the economic activity here. When we get to our 7 flights a week in July, that'll be about 1/3 of the flights that we had in July 2019. And then when we get to the summer, of course, with no North American link, there's questions around how we maintain our off-season or our low season then.
Mr Lyon says the wage subsidy has been a huge help, but it hasn't been enough to keep many young families on the island.
Without access to Samoa and Tonga, as you'll be aware, the New Zealand horticultural industry is really suffering, and Cook Islands has been somewhat filling that gap, and that's been a drain on us.
We take a drive around the island to Aorangi, stopping in on husband and wife team Ngā Matua Mamanu and Mania Clark Mamanu, who run Tumatoa Tours.
It has been very low for us, and there's no tourists around the island, so everything for us dropped very quickly. And during these times of the COVID-19. So during these times here, and they say, okay, what do we do next? We just hang on.
Tumatoa Tours is all about Cook Islands culture and education, things like cooking using an umu, coconut husking and weaving. So it relies heavily on those who aren't from here. In the meantime, the couple have been building a new undercover hut. Then on Tuesday morning, finally some familiar faces showed up.
One of the families is rural New Zealand. Another family, they own a cleaning business in Kapiti, and they come many times. Actually, they want to move here. But to me, it surprised us that it was a priority to them to see us.
Cook Islands Tourism Industry Council President Liana Scott says up to 80% of the country's GDP is tied up in tourism and wonders if something needs to change.
Perhaps our eggs are too much in one basket and we need to diversify, but in saying that, money's already been spent on the investment, the buildings, the hotels, the motels, the houses are up. You can't just suddenly convert it into an agricultural plantations.
Perhaps discussions on how this island nation changes tack are around the corner. In the meantime, though, business owners are forced to tough it out, most still with a smile on their face.
Life is good all the time and full of joy.
From the Cook Islands for Checkpoint, Nick Trubridge.
Opposition to the Olympic Games is intensifying, but the IOC boss is determined they can go ahead safely. Japan is facing a growing number of COVID-19 cases and a slow-moving vaccination program. Recent surveys show up to 80% of the population in Japan doesn't want the Games to go ahead. So if we're not wanted, why are we going? Chief Executive for New Zealand's Olympic Committee, Karen Smith, says she's confident the Games can go ahead safely.
They're a highly capable country, and they, I'm sure, more than capable of making decisions about honouring the obligations and continuing to commit to the Olympics that they bid for and they won. So presently there's been a whole range of countermeasures that have been gradually implemented, such as eliminating international guests, a lot of overseas spectators no longer going. All of those sort of things have gradually come back to the fact that they are committed. And overnight, in fact, as part of the final preparation meetings, their Prime Minister talked about their continued determination as the Japanese government and the Tokyo City authorities, along with others, to continue to prepare and deliver the Games. They continue to be confident they can do that. I mean, it's not for the New Zealand Olympic Committee to make that decision by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, that's a matter for a government to decide whether or not they think it's safe to continue, and that's clearly something they've considered.
OK, Karen, let's be clear on this then. Is it your position that if the Japanese government says the Games are on and the IOC says the Games are on, regardless of everything else, you're going to go?
Well, no, not regardless of everything else. I mean, we're not ridiculous and stupid here. We are absolutely very, very conscious of the health and safety and well-being of our athletes and the Japanese people, and we're doing everything we can. And I'm talking here about the New Zealand Olympic team and our athletes to minimise our footprint in Japan and in Tokyo while we're there. I mean, at the end of the day, the Olympic Games are going ahead for countries of the world. We're one of those countries. Our athletes are obviously committed to going, and as long as we continue to believe and understand and feel confident in the planning and the processes and all the measures that are being taken, we'll continue to go. That's the way the Olympic Games work, and every time there is an Olympic Games, of course, never been one in a global pandemic, but at every Olympic Games there are always issues. It's a global event, and many, many issues of social, geopolitical, moral, all of these issues come to the fore and are all considerations and something we're sensitive to. But notwithstanding that, our job is about the New Zealand team and athletes. Other people are thinking about the Games and how those are presented.
How many of the New Zealand athletes have been vaccinated? Probably around 75-80%, I think, ish. So the reason is that it's sort of a process ongoing. So I'm not specifically sure of the actual number. So when was the last time you were given figures of the number vaccinated?
Oh, well, I think there's around. I don't not dealing day to day, to be honest, with athletes, but I would be reasonably confident that.
But don't you need to know? Don't you need to know that information?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I do, and I'm probably updated every few days. So specifically, that's what I say, around about 70 or 80% of the athletes. Yeah.
70 or 80%.
Yes, that's correct.
So how many?
Actually, the athletes, just to be clear on this point, however, final athletes, some teams haven't actually been selected yet. So the vaccinations are prioritised according to the timing of people's preparation programs and when they're actually confirmed in the team. So there's still around 100 athletes or so that are actually specifically to be named in the team. So it's just a gradual process that we're working towards over as we lead into the Games.
How many have declined to be vaccinated?
At this point in time, I don't know of any that have actually declined. There's the process being worked through in terms of...
So when you say a process, Karen, are you saying that some people, well, they don't want it, they've expressed that view, and now you're trying to provide information and talk them around to it?
Well, we would absolutely want athletes to be vaccinated. There's no doubt in our minds that is the preferred state, and in fact, in terms of the staff and performance support folk that are going to the Games that we appoint, vaccination is a requirement. So there's no doubt that we think that's a preferable situation.
What happens if a team member gets COVID when they're in Japan?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's obviously isolation processes that will either be in the team bubble. So there's a lot of consideration around how the actual team will work and individual sports will work, because some are in the village and some are outside the village. But every location there will be provision for isolating people, so that if there's any symptoms, people can be isolated. If there's a positive test, they would then be isolated within a facility, which will be worked through with the Japanese organising committee. So
if it's a team sport and a member of the team gets COVID, does that mean everyone's out of the Games in that team?
Well, that's one of the things that, to be honest, one of the tricky things that's just being worked through. So at the moment, the issue of close contacts has been defined. So what is a close contact of a person is now defined and clear and written down, so we know and understand that. The process of actually eliminating people from competition and who are their close contacts and the like is still something that's being worked through, and the appeal process around that also is something that's still being worked through.
Karen, in your heart of hearts, is this the right thing to do, to take a team over to Tokyo, to the Olympics, as things stand?
Well, Japanese government are our hosts, and they continue to be confident they can host an Olympic Games in a very modified form, and every day we get more information about that. Our athletes want to go, and we're going to do the right thing by the athletes and by our country. I don't, for one moment, underestimate that this is a very complex situation we find ourselves in. But notwithstanding that, it is a global, sports events are going on around the globe. More and more events are starting. The Olympics happens to be one of considerable scale and complexity. But if the athletes want to go, if we're satisfied that we can ensure their health and safety and performance, and the hosts still want us, then we'll be going.
And that was the Chief Executive for New Zealand's Olympic Committee, Karen Smith. E te iwi haere nei a Checkpoint, our expert panel will give their take on the budget. We'll get Judith Collins' take too, and Auckland Mayor Phil Goff on the resignation of Port's boss Tony Gibson. Ho mai o whakaaro, we would love to hear from you. Your thoughts on anything on the programme this evening, do send us your feedback. You can text us 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Anything in the budget for you? What do you make of all the numbers? Do get in touch. It is time for the headlines now with Susanna.
The government says its budget is a way of addressing inequality that has built up over the last 30 years. Finance Minister Grant Robertson unveiled the budget this afternoon with big spending promises to beneficiaries in health and education and for green transport initiatives. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says she doesn't want the next generation to carry a social debt and is comfortable taking on more debt to fund the government's programs. The Finance Minister Grant Robertson says the focus of the budget is on people on lower incomes, and he is proud of it. Mr Robertson told Checkpoint that the increase in benefits was a big step in helping people start to live with dignity. He says that there was still work to do around inequality, but they were also trying to balance bringing net debt down over time. The Leader of the Opposition, however, says the government should have reined in spending in order to deal with debt built up from responding to COVID-19. National's Judith Collins says the budget is full of empty promises and zero plans for growth. Mrs Collins says National would have focused more on job creation. The Abuse and Care Royal Commission says $90 million given to it in the budget will allow it to continue to reveal the full extent of historical abuse. The Royal Commission says the ongoing support from government will mean it will deliver its redress report in October. It says the inquiry has so far found historical abuse and neglect is far greater than first thought. The embattled Chief Executive of Ports of Auckland says the pressure put on his family in recent months led to his resignation. Tony Gibson says it was the right decision given the scrutiny he was under over safety concerns at the port. An independent report into 3 deaths in recent years at the port found systemic failings, suspected underreporting of accidents and workers afraid to speak up. Those are the latest news headlines on RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō. If you are just joining us, this is Checkpoint and it's budget day. For many, that's a soup of zeros, shopping lists and political white noise. So what does it actually mean for you, business and the economy? Well, to help us unpack the detail is our expert panel. Let's introduce them. We'll start in the Windy City. Phil O'Reilly is a business consultant and a member of the government's Welfare Advisory Group. Hi, Phil.
How are you going, Lisa?
Lance Norman, who's also in Wellington, is a Māori health leader with iwi affiliations to Ngāti Kuri, Ngāti Pui and Ngāti Whātua. And Lady Tiriti Moxon joins me in the studio. She's the chair of the National Māori Urban Authority and is Ngāti Pahuwera, Ngāti Kahununu and Kaitahu. And also joining us is Dr. Ella Henry from AUT, and her expertise is in business and Māori development. And she is Ngāti Kahu, Kia Whangaroa and Ngāti Kuri in Te Rarawa. Hello to you all and thank you for joining us. Let's start with the overview. So if I can start with you, Phil, this is a majority Labour government. It is the first, well, shall we say, pure Labour budget in decades. No coalition partners tacked on here. Could you tell that from the budget?
Well, any budget that mentions the Hillside Railway Workshop must be a pretty Labour heartland budget, right? So the fact that the big spend was on, of course, lifting main benefits, which was one of 42 recommendations by the Welfare Expert Advisory Group. I personally think that's a good idea. But a lot of the rest of it was pretty normal stuff, and I actually think that's a good thing. You could have had a whole bunch of COVID this, COVID that. In fact, to their credit, the government didn't do that. They said, here's some Labour heartland stuff, whether you agree with that or not. We're returning to a more normal situation. Here's how we go forward. So from my perspective, not the worst in that context, although not a budget for business at all, much more a budget for those Labour heartland concerns, rail, welfare, skills training, health and so on.
OK, we'll get to business in a minute, but I want to ask you, Ella, do you think it was transformational?
No, short answer, but there was incremental and very positive contributions, particularly, and that's my focus around additions to Māori development, Māori initiatives, housing, that sort of thing. And of course, like you, Phil, I absolutely praise the increase in benefit levels. For some people, it means a growth from abject poverty to desperate poverty, but at least there's a move, and so for that I think they deserve praise.
Lady Tiriti, did it go far enough?
I think there is a long way further to go, but at least the government have acknowledged the fact that there are inequalities and that it was time for change, and I think Māori have benefited. We've got $1 billion out of this particular budget, but I think we've got a long way further to move in the direction that needs to bring those inequalities and inequities to the place where we need them to be if we are going to move forward as a country.
We'll break down that $1 billion+ in a minute, but let's go to Lance Norman. Lance, obviously health is your focus here. If you looked at this budget on a scale, let's say 1 is bad and 10 is brilliant, where do you think they delivered in that spectrum?
I think across the whole budget it's probably a 6 to 7. In the health space, I think the rating would be higher because in the Māori space we've been particularly waiting for this Māori Health Authority for almost a decade. It was announced by Andrew Little a few weeks ago, so that was positive, and it's really good to actually see funding dedicated to establish it and then get the sort of commissioning framework set up. So we'll take that as a win. When you look at the percentages relative to DHBs and the ministry, it's still a small percentage. So
242 million, right? That's not just to set up the Māori Health Authority, it also said it was to fund health initiatives, and I'm wondering how much of a stake in equity does that buy you?
Well, if you look at it, that's a 0.3% on the 20 billion plus health budget. So it's a good start from a zero base, but there's going to be a heck of a lot of work to reconfigure the DHBs, to get policy better, to get funding better, to actually roll out a commissioning model rather than having a output focused health system that we tend to have, and there's significant access issues that we're still having. So, that's a good start, but I think there needs to be a few more zeros to fully make that organisational functional over time.
Lady Terita, you've long been campaigning for Māori health initiatives. Did that number fill you with joy?
Well, I think that it's an establishment budget in terms of the Māori Health Authority. But actually, Lance, we've been going for 15, nearly 17 years. So since 2005 to get this Māori Health Authority across the line. So it's been a long haul. But at least it's a start. And it's a start for by Māori for Māori. It's a start, and the Minister has said, it's a start to recognise the partnership between Māori and non-Māori and the Crown. And I think that it's a good start, but I think that we need to be looking at the next budget to ensure that we are getting true equity in terms of the needs of our people.
Ella, you mentioned the benefits and said, well, it's a shift from being really, really poor to just a little less poor, right? So this government has said, and Grant Robertson repeated today, that it's about giving people a life with dignity. Does $55 extra give you a life with dignity?
I think it's a step in the right direction. And let's be very clear that this is an important contribution to finding some kind of welfare system that allows people to live with a certain amount of dignity. It also has to be backed up with the other parts of the budget, which is around creating more social housing, improving health sector and education and training opportunities so we can actually move people out of poverty, not just put a little bit more food on the table for the next few months, but how do we get those kids remaining in education? How do we make their housing safe? How do we create the programs that are going to really make the fundamental changes? And I do think the bare bones are here.
Phil, let's talk to you about this because you were on the Welfare Expert Advisory Committee. Did you expect more?
Well, actually, when I said it previously, there were 42 recommendations that were made.
Yeah.
The one that got a heat and light was, of course, the one that the government talked about today, and good for them for doing that. But I agree with those previous comments that really what you want to do is create some dignity around this and create the right kind of conditions for people to move off welfare. And the big gap that I saw, I was looking for it, didn't find it, was a bunch of the recommendations that I was particularly passionate about during the WEAG process, about activating employment, investing heavily in work-ready skills, making sure people were capable of doing work, both the soft skills and the hard skills piece, and then activating work so that hopefully they got a job that was better than some minimum wage kind of part-time sort of thing. So I'm not seeing much there, and the danger of doing one and not the other is that you hit a welfare trap that's just a more expensive welfare trap than the one that you had previously. So I'll continue to look for a holistic approach which says we need to treat people with dignity while they're on welfare, and we need to activate all of the good things that come from getting as many of them as possible a job.
Well, in talking to the Minister, he used the example of $315 a week. It would boost you up to that, right? And just to give it some perspective, on the minimum wage, you get about $800, so it's less than half of that. And if you're talking about the living wage, even with the boost, it's around a third of that.
Well, precisely. That's why you want the capacity for people to get some training, get some help, some pastoral care, so that they go and get one of those jobs, and hopefully more than a living wage job. And so one of the things I was really passionate about, along with Robert Reid on the group, was this whole issue of active labour market policies to try and make sure that we minimised time on, for example, the unemployment benefit or with kids in poverty, and we could actually move forward so that they have some choices and some stake in our communities and our society and their own prosperity. That's really, I think, the conversation we haven't yet had. There's been a lot of triumphalism over moving main benefits rates higher. Good for them. The government should be congratulated for that. What about the rest, about the living and dignity piece?
Yeah. Lance, can I come to you? Pharmac So an announcement that meets the manifesto commitments of Labor, 200 million there, but a lot of people advocating for the drug buying agency to get twice that. And in comparison, Scott Base got around 300 million. Are we getting our priorities right here when it comes to health?
Well, I think, once again, it's a step in the right direction, but it's not enough to cover the issues that our community is having. I would have thought the budget would be 10 times that in terms of what's recovered. It's like a good news, bad news story. The good news is now there's a dedicated line item budget and it's identifiable, but it's not enough. So like everything we've discussed just now, most things are good but need to be better. So people that are struggling to access medications at the moment will be thinking, well, that's good, but that will not be enough to look after some of the health issues we've got.
So when it comes to health, Lance, when you looked at this and you were in the lockup, what was the thing that you desperately wanted to find here? And despite turning, no doubt, tens of pages, you didn't find it, wasn't there. What is it? Well,
I wanted to find about 10 things. One I found really quickly, which was the Māori Health Authority, so I like that. But there's other ministries, MSD, Justice, Police, Corrections. We didn't really see anything different on those, and we know we have issues in all of those sort of vote areas. I was really pleased with the housing. One thing was really disappointing is no investment in whānau water, and whānau water was proven to be substantial policy. A lot of people have had some really good success, particularly through COVID and lockdown and continually. You've got, we talked about Beneficiary struggling, but they're struggling across health, education, employment, a bunch of things, and whānau water brings all of those together. And there wasn't a single dollar against that budget line item. So that was particularly disappointing that I was expecting to be in there.
Well, Lance, Lady Tiriti here is nodding her head while you're saying that. Whānau water, was that a big disappointment to you?
It was.
And why?
We have been shown that our communities are very successful in whānau water, wrapping services around our people, supporting them in that pastoral care, supporting them to get to where they want to and need to go. And the issue is that, you sort of give money to this area and then you take it away from another area. And I don't think that Māori should always be at that other end of the scale where you're actually having to move around the small peanuts that you're being allocated. And I think that's it is disappointing, and I hope that there is a strategy for other ministries to be feeding into whānau water going forward, because that's probably the only way that whānau water is going to grow and innovate.
From a political point of view, Ella, 1.1 billion for Māori initiatives. The Māori caucus of Labour were, by all accounts, battling hard behind the scenes to get allocations here. Is this going to be enough to satisfy all those voters who rallied round and kept pretty much all those Māori MPs in their constituencies? Is this enough?
Well, I think this government has 2.5 years more to prove itself to Māori. And as Lady Tiriti said from the outset, this is an incremental budget. And what Labour have learned is that Māori pay attention. And we will be looking to see how this progresses in the coming years. But, plaudits to our Māori caucus for what they have been able to achieve, albeit $1 billion out of a $300 billion GDP does not seem hugely significant. It at least has been well, I think, pepper-potted across a range of issues, particularly around Māori housing and Māori health. So we have to give plaudits where plaudits are due.
Phil, would there be a better time than to go bold? If you look at all the forecasts, right, 2.9% this year for growth, going up to 4.4%, really low unemployment figures, and debt. The debt track is better than expected. They were expecting it to peak at about 55% of GDP. It's lower than that. If you're not going now, when are you going?
Well, I guess I'd take a view that you do want more of a concentration on paying down debt because all it would take is another Christchurch earthquake tomorrow and all of a sudden our government debt would be very, very high indeed. So we do need to be cautious in New Zealand. We're not the UK, we're not Japan. We can't afford these very, very high debt levels. So, I was a little disappointed there wasn't a little more aggression around that. But in terms of going bold, what the budget definitely did not do was go bold about growth. the United States economy this year will grow 6.5%. The Chinese economy is currently growing at 18%. Now, all of that, of course, is COVID related. It's the bounce back. It's the almost like the roaring 20s coming out of those economies. Our growth rate, 3%. One of the lowest now in the OECD, and I think the opportunity that the government lost from a straight economic development and business perspective was that they didn't think enough about how we can pick up on that upside of what's going on around the world now. We've kind of won the COVID war, which is terrific. Let's hope we continue to do that, but we may lose the post-COVID piece. And there just wasn't any thinking I couldn't see really from government about saying, how do we take advantage of that? How do we, for example, invest in getting businesses to build their digital infrastructure? How do we get the real infrastructure? How do we get roads to ports? How do we get those sorts of things happening so the business could say, there's something in this for us? There really wasn't any of that today, regrettably, and on that basis, I don't think the budget was bold at all and needed to be.
Lance, 1.1 billion for Maori. Within that is this 380 million to go on Maori housing initiatives. It's only 1,000 new houses and 700 properties repaired. How much of a difference is that going to make?
Well, it'll make a little difference, but we've got to be careful we don't get caught up in the big number. So our people will see $380 million, and I think that's awesome, which it is awesome. But it still is 10% of that housing budget. So on a needs basis, Māori currently have 50% of the requirement. There's 11,000 whānau on a waiting list now.
So should that have been 50% of the DOSH then, Lance?
Well, it depends on the lens you look at. So if you looked at it on a population quota, Māori represent 16%. If you look at it on needs, it's normally between 25 and 30%. If you're looking at it from a treaty point of view, it would be 50%. But I think, once again, it's a good starting proposition, which will look after maybe 10% of the issue we have, but they haven't resolved the 90% of the issue. And I think that's where I see in this budget that they've done some really good work, but it hasn't gone far enough.
So why haven't they been bolder?
Well, I was just going to say, like Phil, they haven't been bolder, but I think they haven't been bolder in the other end of town, which is how do we raise beneficiary rates better? How do we, because the rents are going up more than the subsidy that was given today in the budget. Costs are going up, but yeah, housing will be a good activity. So I don't want to rubbish that, because that was a very big number and a good bold statement. But yeah, that will only get 1,000 whānau into a house, and there's 10,000 now. So I would have gone bolder on that one, because that creates jobs, that creates infrastructure, and then there's margin and GST that's generated throughout that. So that's something where you could have had a sort of social gain and a financial gain in terms of going really big on infrastructure.
Lady Tiriti, I see you again nodding about housing, and this is obviously, well, it flows onto everything, doesn't it? Your house, does. Everything.
It flows. It's all about health in the end, and housing, and that whole thing around dignity. I own my own home. I feel good about myself, and then it flows into work. If they've got good work, if they've got good training or whatever, all these things come in to build up the economic status of our people, and also the economy of this country. So it's really, really very important what Lance is saying. It's a start, but it really speaking, if you looked at a true treaty partnership, it would have been 50% for every Maori in this country who is screaming out for houses, who are in those state accommodations and those motels, should be rehoused. And I think we're going to have that problem with us for a long time, but it is a good start.
Ella, if you looked at this, and we've heard Lance give it a grade, he gave it sort of in the upper 2/3 on a scale of 1 to 10, as the clock counts down for us now. Give us your overall impression and rate it for me, this budget.
I'd actually concur with Lance. I think it's not quite a big plus, which is 7.5, but it's well into the Bs. I just want to add one thing. 35 years ago, the training incentive allowance took me from being a solo mother to finishing my first degree, and for 35 years I've paid more in taxes than I used to get on a benefit. And we got rid of the training incentive allowance, and I think we need to bring back those kinds of incentives to get beneficiaries to transform their lives.
Phil, we've got 7.5s here. Where are you sitting on that scale?
Can I give you 2 scores on the welfare stuff? I think that is good. I think that's a 6. That's good work, and they need to do more there. On the idea of getting the private sector out in the lead, giving the private sector confidence to invest, confidence to grow, confidence to build community prosperity, just nothing. It's a fail.
So you basically, you're with Judith Collins when she says she didn't find anything significant for business in this.
No, there's some useful stuff for business. The small business piece, there's a digital piece. The training is very good. That's very good. But overall, there's no narrative in this budget that says, look, we're going to back the private sector to grow. We're going to back the private sector here to build prosperity. It's still very much a government-centred budget, and it's as if business is sort of running on automatic a little bit. So in that sense, it's a fail. But the overall budget, there's a number of very good things in there, as I say, including the welfare. So it's a complex issue from my personal perspective, but I think looking at it straight as a business person, not much in it, I don't think, for the private sector.
Lady Tiriti, what's your score for it?
Well, I think in terms of Māori development and the spend on Māori, I would say it's probably a 6.
Okay. Lance, we've already had your score, but you've got about, 20 seconds. What is your message to the government going forward from here?
I think we've covered this, but I think you can invest heavily in infrastructure and create jobs and will lift the general health and wellbeing of all New Zealanders. So I think you've got to be bold. You can't just do one piecemeal thing to change our economy and turn it around. I think you've got to go bold right across the sector, create jobs, get people get people healthy and get them into houses. So you can do all of that at the same time, but it's almost like you want to do one but not everything.
Thanks to our panel for the kōrero.
RNZ News at 6, ngā mihi nui, ko Susana Leātau tēnei. Benefits will be boosted by up to $55 a week, potentially lifting tens of thousands more children out of poverty. It's a centrepiece move by the government in today's budget. The 2-stage increase will cost $3.3 billion over 4 years. Here's our social issues reporter, Sarah Robson.
Beneficiaries will get the first $20 a week increase from July. A second increase will occur in April next year, bringing benefits up to the levels recommended 2 years ago by the Welfare Expert Advisory Group. Whānau with children will be topped up with an extra $15 per adult per week. The government says families with children will be better off, on average, by $40 a week. It's projected the changes will lift between 19,000 and 33,000 children out of poverty on the after housing costs measure by 2023. Ko Sarah Robson, aho.
The Minister of Finance says the government is investing heavily in health to meet the wellbeing needs of New Zealanders. The government will spend a total of $24 billion on health in the next financial year. Grant Robertson says the public must have access to quality health services.
Securing our recovery also requires a substantial investment so that the basic wellbeing needs of New Zealanders are being met and that we have world-class public services.
A massive overhaul of the country's health system will cost more than $500 million just to get started. The spending includes nearly $100 million to set up the new Maori Health Authority. Pharmac has been given $200 million further funding. The Leader of the Opposition says Budget 2021 is a stagnation budget. Judith Collins says the government should have reined in spending and left future generations with less debt. Ms Collins told the House the budget is full of empty promises and zero plans for growth and is setting the country up to fail. Business groups have largely panned the budget as a missed opportunity. Increased skills training and help in digital transformation were the business policies in the budget. Business NZ head Kirk Hope says there's no quibble with increased social spending, but he says the sector was keen to see less burdensome regulation and more to stimulate growth and development. The Auckland-based Employer and Manufacturers Association says addressing labour and skills shortages was needed. And the Property Council says the budget didn't offer new options on key issues, including housing supply, climate resilience and delivering infrastructure. The Abuse and Care Royal Commission says $90 million given to it in the budget will allow it to continue to reveal the full extent of historical abuse. The money has been allocated for the next 2 years. The Royal Commission says the ongoing support from government will mean it will deliver its redress report in October. It says the inquiry has so far found historical abuse and neglect is far greater than first thought. In other news, the embattled Chief Executive of the Ports of Auckland has resigned after weeks of mounting criticism over health and safety at the organisation. Tony Gibson has quietly announced his resignation amid the flurry of Budget Day. Jean Bell reports.
There have been 3 port fatalities in recent years, and an independent report found systemic failings, suspected underreporting of accidents, and workers afraid to speak up. Tony Gibson said his position has become untenable amid intense shareholder and media attention. Maritime Union of New Zealand National Secretary Craig Harrison is hopeful his departure will allow more union input into port operations. The Auckland Chamber of Commerce Chief Executive Michael Barnett, however, says the ports company has lost an internationally experienced leader due to political bullying. Called Jean Bell DNA.
The UK government's under mounting pressure over its COVID-19 international travel rules. Trips to countries rated as green and amber on the UK's traffic light system became legal on Tuesday. But it's not that simple, as our correspondent Ollie Barrett reports.
British travellers have been flocking to Portugal in their thousands since Monday, one of the 12 green-listed destinations, and on their return to the UK they won't need to quarantine. But one government minister this week suggested people could visit friends and family in amber locations, although he was then contradicted by the Prime Minister. Then a health minister urged people not to holiday abroad at all this year. That is not the government position, but Boris Johnson now says people should only visit amber locations for essential reasons.
The former US President Donald Trump has reacted angrily to the news an inquiry into his business dealings by the New York Attorney General is now a criminal rather than civil investigation. He says he's being unfairly attacked and abused. It's 6:05. The New Zealand Olympic Committee maintain it's doing the right thing by athletes in going to the Tokyo Games. Surveys have shown up to 80% of the Japanese public don't want the Games to go ahead, while Tokyo doctors have also called on the Games to be cancelled. But the Chief Executive of the NZOC, Karen Smith, told Checkpoint New Zealand athletes are determined to compete, and the International Olympic Committee is confident it can deliver the Games safely.
We're going to do the right thing by the athletes and by our country. I don't for one moment underestimate that this is a very complex situation we find ourselves in. But the athletes want to go if we're satisfied that we can ensure their health and safety and performance, and the hosts still want us, then we'll be going.
The Games start on July 23rd. All Black George Bridge is set to miss the rest of the Super Rugby Trans-Tasman competition after having his appendix removed this week. It's another setback for Bridge, who suffered a pectoral injury with the All Blacks last year and only returned for the Crusaders last month. Meanwhile, veteran Liam Messam will make his first start for the Chiefs in 3 years when they play the Brumbies in Hamilton on Saturday. The 37-year-old Messam was called into the squad as injury cover and came off the bench in the side's narrow win over the Force in Perth. The Chiefs also welcome back All Black prop Atu Moli for his first appearance in over a year after undergoing hip surgery. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, toxicologist Leo Shep has a very fishy tale you wouldn't want to eat. Andrew Lermont reports from Scotland, where the locals are stopping British immigration officials from expelling refugees, with tacit support from the Scottish police. A sign of rebellion against Westminster? While the singer Dessa tells us what's deeply human about déjà vu. And no, it's not a repeat, but it is on Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service till midnight tomorrow. Northland to Waitomo, Coromandel Peninsula and Central High Country. Cloudy periods with isolated showers. Bay of Plenty, fine tonight, becoming cloudy tomorrow with evening drizzle. Taranaki to Kapiti Coast, cloudy periods, a chance of a shower tomorrow. Gisborne to Wairarapa, including Wellington, Nelson and Marlborough. Fine apart from cloudy periods in Wellington and Wairarapa tonight. Bulla to Fiordland mostly cloudy. Isolated showers turning to rain in Fiordland tonight, then spreading elsewhere tomorrow, clearing to find south of Bulla tomorrow night. For Canterbury, mainly fine, cloud and a few showers developing tomorrow afternoon. Otago and Southland, fine weather, rain developing tomorrow morning with snow lowering to 900 metres for a time, then clearing to fine weather in the afternoon apart from coastal Southland. Chatham Islands, cloudy periods with a few showers. RNZ National, it's 8 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. No mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. The embattled Ports of Auckland Chief Executive has quietly announced his resignation amid the flurry of Budget Day. Tony Gibson had been facing mounting pressure to resign following a scathing independent review into health and safety at the port. Auckland Mayor Phil Goff joins me now. Phil, you have repeatedly declined to express confidence in Tony Gibson, so is it the right decision for him to go?
I think it is the right decision for the Chief Executive. He's made that decision himself. It's not the result of my putting pressure on him. But I have expressed concerns now for some time about a variety of issues on the port, the most notable being health and safety. I set up the review into health and safety because I was really worried about the culture on the waterfront and a culture that did not follow the rules, and the rules weren't monitored and enforced. And the report showed exactly that, and I think that was a serious deficiency on the wharf. But there are other problems there. The hold up and the rollout of the automation, congestion. Now, some of those things aren't necessarily directly under the control of management. They're influenced by COVID, international supply chain problems. But it seemed to me that we weren't well prepared for either of those things. And my other worry, I guess, was the overall declining competitiveness of the wharf in terms of the share of the container traffic and the return on equity and dividends, etc.
In terms of the health and safety issues, were you not seeing a fast enough change in attitude or turnaround with Tony Gibson at the helm?
No, look, I think we were seeing a response from the port as was expected and in fact demanded by us. We have got the organisation that did the independent review also to audit progress in implementing its recommendations. So there is some certainty about that, and I've appointed to the board an expert in health and safety, a Wellington lawyer that specialises in that, and I'm sure that she's on the Health and Safety Committee, will be doing everything in her power to make sure that management is implementing the recommendations as they have agreed to do.
Well, Michael Barnett, you said that you know he's not gone because of your influence. Michael Barnett is suggesting that he was bullied out by stakeholders and media. Have you been bullying him?
No, I'm not a bully by nature, and I don't play the man. I play the ball. It's my role as the Mayor of Auckland, not only as the 100% shareholder, which council is on behalf of the people of Auckland, but also because of the importance of the port. It brings in all of the supply chain for our city to ensure that we exercise governance and oversight over what's happening. I can't control management. I'm prevented and maybe properly by law from doing that, but I am responsible, together with my councillors, for oversight and governance. And the comments that we make and the questions that we asked, and we asked those questions as recently as Wednesday this week. We're Thursday, might have been Tuesday this week in public session, saying what's happening here, why isn't this happening quickly enough, why are we seeing these figures? Those are the appropriate questions for us to ask. I would be negligent in my responsibility were I not to ask those questions. I don't think you can characterise that as bullying.
Did he get a golden handshake or payout of any form?
I don't know what the settlement has been. That is between the board of the Ports of Auckland and the chief executive.
But there is some kind of settlement, Phil, outside of his, salary.
All I've been told, and this is indirectly, is that the payment that he gets are only those payments that are within his contract. Now, I don't know what that is, and I don't know what the settlement is. But if it is a resignation, then you're not talking about severance or redundancy payments.
Do you think that the chair of the board needs to go as well?
Look, I'm giving the board a chance. There are 2 new members on that board, and there will be 3 new members appointed in coming months. A chance to get on and to do what they need to do to apply governance over the management at the port, to get a turnaround in health and safety, to remedy the problem of congestion at the port to the extent that it's within their power to do that, to make sure that the automation is finally rolled out, and to ensure that we are getting a more competitive port that can return a dividend to the people of Auckland. Now, I'm giving them the chance to do that.
Appreciate you joining us this evening. That is Auckland Mayor Phil Goff. Big bumps to benefits have been mostly welcomed among people on the streets of the main centres. The government's preparing to splash $3.4 billion in 4 years in a bid to put food on people's tables, help them pay the bills and get more children out of poverty. Katie Todd reports.
All main benefits will jump by $20 a week from the 1st of July. That's the job seeker payment, sole parent payment and supported living payment. By April 2022, they'll all have increased by at least $32 a week and up to $55 a week. In Auckland, these people are optimistic it will make day-to-day expenses a little easier for the most vulnerable.
It's a lot of money for a lot of people. It is going to make a difference. Yeah, that's going to feed at least one person in the family for a week.
I think that it still might be difficult for people to buy a house or anything like that, but it might just really help them with the rent and for just some basics really. But I mean, if it doubles, it's got to be better.
In Whangarei, there were similar positive sentiments.
I think for those of us who most needs it, I think it's going to make a difference.
It would make a difference for me. I mean, rents are horrendous, getting, higher and higher, living costs in general. I certainly felt for the last couple of years.
Someone directly affected is Amy in Christchurch.
As a beneficiary, because I have health issues, I can't work. That is very happy days for the food budget.
In Auckland, Anisha thinks a further step up is overdue.
I know someone who lost their job due to COVID and they had to go on the benefit and they had bills to pay, like all the bills to pay, and they only got a small amount and that wasn't even enough to cover their rent. So I think it's really good because I feel like, especially for people who've lost their jobs during COVID and they need to go on there because they have to make ends meet.
But across the country, RNZ reporters heard some concerns that the spend is misdirected.
From what I've seen of the budget so far, I don't think it's going to make a big difference to people's lives at all.
For the people that need the benefit, yeah, that's real good. But for the people who are just sitting on their ass, bludging, I think it's just money in the hand that they want, that they don't need. I think the parents who care about child poverty are already doing enough. I don't think the $50 is going to make that much of a difference.
The increases follow a $25 a week lift to benefits last April as part of the COVID-19 response. The government estimates the benefit increases will lift between 19,000 to 33,000 children out of poverty. Anisha is dubious if it's enough to break the cycle.
I do know a lot of people who, the money that they get, they spend it on drinking and, smoking. I mean, they should really just be looking after their families.
Do you feel like benefit increases could help with that child poverty?
No, I think that money for some people may just go towards, all the unnecessary things.
The welfare boost is billed as the biggest in a generation. Grant Robertson says it also acts as further support and stimulus to the economy as the country recovers from COVID-19. For Checkpoint, ko Katie Todd, tēnei.
Nothing in it for Middle New Zealand. That's how National's describing the budget. The opposition party says Labour's budget lacks a plan, ambition, aspiration and direction, and there's not much for business either. So I asked Judith Collins what she liked from the budget.
Giving Pharmac some more money was good, but not enough. I thought that there needed to be increases in benefits, but because of the cost of living, but there's plenty of other things I didn't like. And I felt that there was no plan for the future to grow the economy.
OK, well, let's dig down into some of that. You, in your media statement, have said there was nothing in this budget for Middle New Zealand. Who's Middle New Zealand?
Well, actually, mostly it's people who are working or they've retired, and they are not necessarily on full benefits, or they're people who I think are generally able to pay their own way in life, and I think that they would certainly, the nurses and the teachers would see themselves as Middle New Zealand. I thought there was a a shocking lack of acknowledgement about the cost of living in the speeches that the government gave. And although there was an acknowledgement from Treasury in the actual budget document itself.
So, Judith, what is the one thing you would have delivered for Middle New Zealand, as you call them, in this budget?
Well, I think there's lots, like a plan for growth would have been great. We would have given some more money to Pharmac. We would have, for instance...
How much more would you have given to Pharmac?
Well, we promised in the election campaign $280 million more, and we would have delivered on that, and we would be looking to see how else we can get our big drugs buyer, Pharmac, able to deliver for New Zealanders something closer to what the Australians are able to get. I thought too is that there was an opportunity for the government to start putting some work around technology and particularly on R&D and science-based solutions around emissions. They could have done a bit more on that. I thought too is that they seem to have no answers to the fact that many working people who are paying their own way and paying taxes are finding that there's very little left for them after they've paid for their own rent. And I thought that there was no particular plan to deal with any more outbreaks in the pandemic. There was a massive cost increase in terms of restructuring of the health system, $500 million. And yet at the same time, our health people in our team have said it looks like there's an effective cut in what's going to be available for DHBs to produce the hip and knee operations and everything else they have to do.
Right, well, because some of the numbers, $380 million for Māori housing, $240 million for setting up the Māori Health Authority, and also obviously $1.4 billion for the COVID vaccine delivery. Isn't all of that stuff for Middle New Zealand?
Well, I thought that some of that will be, but I also think that the entire way in which the Maori Health Authority has been categorised by the government as having a veto power over the rest of the general health budget, that is not something I accept, and nor will our party. But in terms of delivery, this is all about structures, this government. They like setting up bureaucracies and structures instead of, how about some timeframes and deliveries around things like getting the immunisations done. We're 3% immunised in this country on COVID-19. We're the second worst in the OECD. Australia above us now. I mean, it's just like, can't we be a bit more aspirational?
When it came to the benefits, you reckon, well, that probably didn't go far enough. So some people might be surprised to hear you say that. How much would you have given beneficiaries?
I don't think I said that. What I said is that we didn't see that there was much alternative given the cost of living. That's been in the cost to actually food, transport, housing, rent, all these things. The fact that we've got 360,000
So if it's not going to go
New
far
Zealanders.
enough, Judith, if it's not going to go far enough, given everything that you've stated in terms of rising costs, how much would you have kicked in for benefits to ensure that more children are raised out of poverty?
I'm not going to add them increase any more from what the government's already talked about today. I think they're simply acknowledging that the cost of living has gone through the roof, and the people who are least able to make decisions about where they buy things, because they're buying essentials mostly, that they're the ones who are being hit. So my view is get people into work, get them into work where they are actually able to pay for themselves. That is the best solution. What I saw from the government today was an admission of failure around what they did. And Grant Robertson was talking about 30 years ago, and he started talking about the restructurings of the 1980s under Labour. I mean, this was stop moaning about 30 years ago and start thinking about the future. This was a very, very much a back to the future sort of type budget.
In terms of unemployment forecasts, though, Judith, they're looking pretty good, and some of the best numbers probably that we've experienced in some time. So they are getting people back into work, aren't they?
Well, not necessarily, because as you know, the unemployment statistics are based on the Household Labour Force Survey, and that's the people who say whether or not they're available to take on more work. It's hard to say that unemployment's going great guns if you've got 200,000 people on the unemployment or the job seeker benefit, and that's up 70,000 since before COVID, and actually 50,000 after COVID. So it was already going up. I don't think that's something to be proud of. I am very much focused on things like where's the housing, get people into housing, no answer around housing other than that RMA reform in another 4 years. Well, that's not going to do it. I gave them the answer. Do what we did after Christchurch earthquakes, get some urgent consenting done, get houses built fast. That's the way to deal with it. And they had no answers on it.
And that was the leader of the National Party, Judith Collins. It is 22 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. An 84-year-old Northland woman who's raising her teenage grandsons let out a little whoop when she heard about today's benefit boosts. The government's announced all main benefits will jump by $20 a week from July, with some increasing by up to $55 by April next year. It comes after years of campaigning from community groups to raise baseline benefits. And while they're pleased with today's announcements, they're still hopeful of more money for those doing it toughest. Nita Blake-Person reports.
Janet Puriri retired nearly 20 years ago. She's 84 now, but the end of her working days did not mean life slowed down.
I taught continuously until I turned 65 in 2001. I retired in December, and in February I got my first grandchildren to live with me.
She has since cared for 8 of her grandkids. At the moment, 2 of her teenage grandsons are with her, while another 2 adult grandsons are living in cabins on the property with their families. She's not yet sure how much extra money she will get from today's budget, but she's hopeful of a boost to care for her mokopuna.
And I'll get extra benefit for the 2 children that I have on unsupported child benefit. And they're unsupported because their mum's in rehab and their dad's dead.
While Janet says she's not slammed by rising rents as they're fortunate enough to own the property they live on, she's still careful with cash.
You really have to count the trips you make to town, and you have to make every trip count. As I said, I spent over $300 this morning on groceries, but that's a week's groceries. And apart from bread and possibly milk, that's what will last us for a week, including the nights when there are 9 of us for dinner, but for 6 every night.
It was the single parent she really hoped would do well out of today's budget, and by April next year those parents will see their benefits increase by $36 a week. A couple with kids will get an extra $55 a week in job seeker support, or an extra $42 in supported living payment. Individuals without children will have their job seeker support jump by $48 a week, or $55 a week for couples. The supported living payment will jump by $32 a week for individuals without children, or $42 for couples. And the income thresholds for childcare assistance will also be adjusted each year in line with the average wage. But not everyone's happy. The increase has been met with frustration by Auckland Action Against Poverty Group. Here's coordinator Brooke Stanley-Powell.
It's an increase, but it's nowhere near enough in terms of what AAAP has been campaigning for. There's a lot of work to do in ensuring that people have enough to make the best choices for themselves and their families and meeting their basic needs. And Labor continues to kind of offer us incremental changes, which is it's not good enough.
They've been campaigning for livable incomes and say Labor missed the mark to step up.
People having enough to thrive even after all their essential bills have been paid for. Having enough for people to participate in society. Having the resources to make the best choices for themselves and their families. We feel like this was an opportunity for Labor to, really fulfil their promise on transforming the welfare system.
The government's been told there's more room for more action to make truly transformative change. For Checkpoint, Nita Blake-Person.
Pop-up warnings on a police computer system that told them to take a heavily intoxicated man to hospital have been the focus at the trial of 3 Taranaki police officers. They're charged with the manslaughter of Alan Ball while he was in custody at the Hawera police station in June 2019. Our Taranaki Whanganui reporter Robin Martin has been at the High Court in New Plymouth.
It's alleged the 3 officers failed in their duty of care to the 55-year-old. They deny the charge. Detective Sergeant Byron Reid analysed the CCTV footage of the incident and entries into the police computer system, the National Intelligence Application, or NIA, which prompts police responses to situations. Crown Prosecutor Cherie Clark said Mr Ball's level of alcohol consumption was entered into the system as extreme. She asked Detective Sergeant Reid what consequences that would have.
When extreme is filled in on the alcohol link questions as being the degree affected by alcohol, a pop-up alert appears.
Yes, that's correct.
And is that what we see over on page 6?
Yes, it is.
And what does that alert read?
If the detainee has been affected by alcohol to an extreme measure,
consideration should be made whether hospitalisation is required.
Ms Clark then drew attention to entries regarding Mr Ball's responsiveness.
Level of consciousness, if unresponsive, does not respond to any stimuli entered, what happens?
So if you refer back to page 12, if you enter that unresponsive does not respond to any stimuli, the pop-up says immediate hospitalisation is required. If you expect a delay in the ambulance's arrival or the person's condition calls for immediate action, use a police vehicle.
The Crown says that 2 of the officers charged with Mr Ball's care deliberately ignored pop-up warnings in near the police computer application. Earlier, Detective Sergeant Reid told the court he had spent more than 80 hours watching the CCTV footage and aligning it with a transcript of the audio and the NIA entries. Ms Clark asked what that had involved.
From your perspective and analysis of it all, do you pick up everything you need to on the first run through?
No, you don't. You don't pick it up on the second, sometimes the third, fourth. So there's things that you listen and then will change, and then you go away and you come back and you re-listen and then you pick something else up.
And so to the best of your ability, is this transcript as accurate for what you can hear?
Yes, it is.
And to be fair, would you say it's 100% accurate?
No.
The defence team acknowledges their clients made mistakes, but they say that did not amount to criminal offending. They are yet to cross-examine Detective Sergeant Reid. The trial is set down for 4 weeks. I ngā mutu mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi pōnei, ko Robin Martin ahau.
Some of you have been getting in touch about the budget and our budget coverage. This listener says, seems like pensioners miss out yet again. Another person says, budget is despairing news, for it means our children and grandchildren will spend decades recovering from this far-left budget. Di says, not a budget for business? ? We've had a whole year of a budget for business. That's why the country didn't fall over. Last word to Roger, who says, excellent panel discussion on the budget, reminding us why we should consider and shouldn't fear an upper house of parliament with equal Māori representation to ensure te tiriti obligations are met and to ensure an equitable future for all in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Thank you for your feedback. Back tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The government says up to 33,000 children will be lifted out of poverty with the changes announced in the budget. Business groups believe that the budget should have focused more on stimulating growth. The Auckland Mayor says the resignation of the Ports of Auckland boss was not due to political and union bullying. Waikato mayors say that people are getting frustrated at services being postponed as the DHB grapples with a cyber attack. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
It comes down to just awareness across those that use computers, because we all potentially are part of the problem when it comes to cyber issues.
Live with local, national and international stories as they happen.
They have signs that say things like Olympics kill the poor, very strong words as well, IOC go to hell. There's a huge amount of anger.
Up to date if you're up late. Lately with Karen Hay every weeknight from 10 on RNZ National.
Thanks, Karen. I'm Brian Crump, getting ready for another night on RNZ National. My first guest after the news is the toxicologist Leo Shep, and he wants to talk about ciguatera poisoning. Now, this happens when you eat fish that contains toxins produced by dinoflagellates, and they can make you very, very sick indeed. It's more of a tropical thing than a temperate thing, I'm hoping, but Leo will have the details after the news. And this half hour, later on, it's another report from the House team. No doubt been a busy day for them, given the budget was delivered this afternoon. But right now, it's the detail, and it's talking about Wellington on a good day. But how many good days does Wellington get these days?
I'm Sharon Brett Kelly, and today, for the detail, I'm in Wellington. And I'm on my way into the city centre from leafy suburb of Kelburn. It's one of those fabulous, bracing, blustery Wellington days, but not too cold. There's no sign of a southerly. And I'm walking down, there's a special pathway that takes you right down into the city centre, through these really pretty hilly suburbs, past the lovely, interesting wooden houses. And last night we were in Cuba Street out for a pizza, and it was absolutely bustling. So I'm thinking, what is all the fuss about? What is wrong with Wellington? Well, there's this.
It was only essential toilet flushing in central Wellington today after another of the capital's old wastewater pipes burst.
The break is a reminder of the capital's ageing, stinking and failing infrastructure.
This.
And CBD is facing a sharp rise in violence and antisocial behaviour. A lot of this is down to a massive increase in emergency housing, where many are linked to gang members.
This.
Wellingtonians are urging their elected councillors to quit the infighting and get on with the job.
And this.
Bus drivers are under attack!
Bus strikes and lockouts aside, capital commuters were already on edge about Wellington's, unreliable bus network.
We just can't have this situation where we're bashing Wellingtonians around the head with strike action and lockouts.
I'm on my way to talk about why Wellington's lost its mojo with City Councillor Nicola Young. She's a sixth-generation Wellingtonian, and I'll also be talking to Anna Fifield, the new editor of the Dominion Post. But before I do that, I pop into the Corner Dairy to find out what the owner thinks about the city. And you won't believe it. You love the wind?
Yes, I do.
Is that your favourite thing about Wellington?
Oh, that's not favourite, but
And the people?
The people are lovely.
Why do you say that?
We're different, quirky. Although we might dress in black, we got Cuba Street, we got zany characters. The politicians, all the bureaucrats, all the suits.
You love that, do you?
No, I don't know. No, but we've got an eclectic mix of people.
Then, as I head down another pathway, I come across student Sam Jarney and his flatmates. The door to their flat is right there, next to the public path. And the thing that grabbed me was the smashed pane of glass on the door.
That happened last night, yeah.
Oh, what, party?
We had a bit of a small gathering, and it just some unexpected people came around and got a bit angry.
Oh, really? Oh,
yeah.
Gosh. I'm on my way down to the city, and
Yeah.
this is fascinating because you can walk down a public pathway and you're right here, aren't you?
Yeah, no, it's not bad.
And what an amazing view!
Yeah, no. Once you get here, the flat's real nice.
Yeah,
It's just a bit of a hassle getting up and down.
Exactly. And do you love Wellington?
Yeah, I rate it. No, it's real nice. We're all students down here. Oh, what do we love about it? The sunshine. And it's all like walking distance.
People. Flatting's expensive though.
Yeah, that's the worst thing about it.
Well,
Especially
how much are you paying here?
I'm paying $240, and like my mate, you got mates in Christchurch that are paying like $120.
for a room?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
And then it is pretty ridiculous.
Hey, thanks for talking to me.
I wish I was in Wellington. The weather's not so good. The wind, it cuts right through you, and it rains more than it should.
Now, before I carry on my way into the city centre, I meet the Dom Post's Anna Fifield in the studio. She's lived in Tokyo, Beijing and Washington, and I want to get her impressions of her new home.
But I consider Wellington my kind of spiritual home in New Zealand. Like, that's where I went to university and where I worked as a journalist before going overseas, and where all my friends are. So I wanted to go back to Wellington. I mean, I love the vibrancy and the culture, and I even love the weather. You know, there's nothing, you know you're alive when you're battling against the wind trying to cross the street in Wellington. And, you know, I feel really conflicted about it because I go to so many great events. You know, this last week I've just been to Joe Randerson's new play at Circa. I loved every minute of it, even the parts I didn't understand. You know, it's just so rich, the life. But it's also extremely depressing to walk around the streets of Wellington and to see all of these buildings that are closed for earthquake strengthening all around. You know, there's the civic buildings, the library, the civic square buildings, which are closed. But then also you have the Reading Cinema, like this big hulking shell on Courtney Place, the Amora Hotel, all these private buildings as well, which are just sitting there. And then you add into that the fact that a lot of the CBD has quietened down a lot after COVID and people are working flexibly. noticeably much more often. Literally sewage running through the streets of Wellington on some days, many days. Our Dominion Post inbox is often full of people sending in photos of sewage in their street. They could just tell me about it. But there are a lot of infrastructure problems that I do think are sapping some of Wellington's mojo.
This earthquake strengthening issue, the buildings have to be fixed, right?
Yeah, and everything I hear about what's happening at the St James Theatre and other buildings in Wellington, they are fixing them up. And but they're returning them the way they used to be 20 years ago. The St James Theatre will still have 2 toilets for all the dancers. And, they are not modernising the facilities. They're not reimagining what a dance space could look like in the 21st century, and not reimagining how that theatre, how any of those venues could interact with the community. I mean, I would love to see, the Opera House, St James, all these places along Courtney Place spill out onto the street and make it, a Wellington version of the Lincoln Centre in New York or something like that. But there's not that kind of money and not that kind of thinking. So they're just patching it back together and they'll carry on the way they were.
An opportunity lost?
It really feels like an opportunity lost. And it's the kind of thing where if they were doing one building at a time, I'm sure they'd be able to handle it, or even 2. But it's just the concentration of work that is being done, I think, is overwhelming the city.
The housing thing. Now we know that there's a housing crisis, but consents declined dramatically last year in Wellington, and at the same time prices are soaring. It's not only the price of buying a house, it's also renting.
I think it's the overarching problem, and when we look at so many of the other socioeconomic problems in Wellington, they all stem from the housing crisis. So, you have Porirua with the highest rents in the country. And we say Porirua, that's a geographic area, but really it's 2 cities in one. You have this extremely wealthy area of Aotea and Whitby, and then disadvantaged, poorer areas on the other side, the cheek by jowl, these 2 different lives being lived in Porirua. After I came home last year, I bought my first house in Wellington. It was a completely nauseating experience, and I can't look at how big my mortgage is because, Wellington needs more houses, more apartments, more everything. And that would, if they were able to start building, that would solve a big part of the problem. But then you have things like the Shelley Bay development in Wellington.
Shelley Bay has become synonymous with legal battles, famous filmmakers, fraught local politics and iwi infighting.
The High Court's dismissed an application to review the decision to grant a resource consent to the Shelley Bay project. Getting the consent has been fraught with the saga starting in 2016. It's unlikely to be over anytime soon.
Which is by no means a perfect development project, but Wellington needs more houses. So there's that consent process, the bureaucracy that's holding everything up, but also the thing that I found extremely difficult during my own house buying experience last year, and the thing that sets Wellington apart from a lot of other parts of the country is they operate as in a closed tender system in Wellington. So in Auckland, you'll go to an auction and you'll know what people are bidding. In Wellington, we have no idea. I may have paid $200,000 more for my house than the next bidder.
Wow.
I do not know. And I right now I do not want to know, because what can I do with that apart from feel sick? That, I think, is really exacerbating the problem in Wellington, and the people like me are so desperate to own a home now that they just bid crazy, your top dollar and hope for the best.
There's a fiscal crisis in Wellington. There's a massive problem with having to fork out a lot of money to fix the infrastructure, the buildings, that kind of thing, and not enough money coming in from rates and whatnot.
Yeah, absolutely. The bills that they have to pay for all this earthquake strengthening, for fixing the pipes under the streets, which have been neglected for decades, they are massive, hundreds of millions of dollars that they are looking at having to pay. So they're talking about a rate increase of between 14 and 17% next year. But also this council is very debt